and welcome back to Queerly Natural. I'm Ilana.
And I'm Sage. Here at Queerly Natural, we have research-based discussions about sexuality, sex, and gender in nature.
Join us monthly for an episode about a different plant, animal, fungus, or microbe, and learn with us about their lives and how it relates to queer identities in humans.
In a world that tells humans that being queer is wrong, abnormal, and sets us apart from the other life on this planet, we are here to show you the opposite is true.
Based on what nature shows us, being queer is clearly natural.
And welcome back to Queerly Natural. This episode we'll be talking about a frog.
Ooh.
The green frog. The Latin name for this frog is Lithobates clamitans. Clamitans? I feel weird saying clam in the name, but that's just what it is. The species is native to much of the eastern U.S. and southeastern Canada. And in the U.S., they can be found as far south as central Florida and as far west as central Minnesota, Iowa, Oklahoma, and Texas. And then that's how far west they go. And then they reach all the way to the eastern seaboard. In addition to what I just stated, which is their natural range, they've been artificially introduced to other parts of the U.S. and Canada just by human activity and movement.
So in those areas, do you know, are they invasive? Are they just existing?
Yeah, I think they're just existing. I didn't see anything about them being invasive, but they, considering their native range, some of the places they've been successfully introduced to kind of surprised me. They can be found in Nevada now. And, considering they're in pretty, moist parts of the rest of the country, it was just wow, I'm glad they're thriving in Nevada. Very surprising to me.
There's probably some areas in Nevada that have plenty of water.
Right.
I don't know Nevada. I've never been there.
Probably a very heterogeneous place. We shouldn't, stereotype Nevada just because part of it's Death Valley. So maybe I shouldn't have been as surprised as I was. But they're pretty widespread throughout the US and Canada. So you've probably seen one of these if you are from those places.
If it's the frog I'm thinking of, I definitely have.
I definitely have. Yeah, they're very cute, very abundant, at least where I am in New York. But I'm sorry for all you who don't get the joy of seeing this beautiful slimy creature. That's the background of this frog we're talking about. But the reason that we are going to be talking about this frog is because it's the central focus point of a very widespread conspiracy theory. Have you heard of it, Ilana?
Dun, dun, dun. No.
All right. So in 2015, a very famous conservative talk show host, Alex Jones, he's the head of InfoWars, he went viral for going on this rant about the government spraying these chemicals, turning the friggin' frogs gay.
I don't like them putting chemicals in the water that turn the friggin' frogs gay.
What would be the purpose of that?
Apparently the government wants more gay people, even though they made being gay illegal.
And they're gonna do it through frogs?
The implication was that the frogs were just the beginning, and we're next. But anyway, that's the conspiracy theory we're going to talk about. Are we actually turning the friggin' frogs gay?
I know we have definitely upset a lot of frog biology.
Absolutely. They are considered an indicator species, meaning that because they go between land and water and because their skin is so permeable to whatever substances they are exposed to, whatever they're exposed to just kind of gets absorbed into their bodies. Frogs and other amphibians are considered an indicator species. So they're considered one of the first organisms to disappear or decline when a habitat becomes degraded.
So they're the environmental canary in a coal mine.
Exactly. And right now, due to everything going on, habitat fragmentation, in addition to climate change, they are falling prey to a terrible fungal disease. Do you remember what fungus it is, Ilana?
Chytrid?
Yeah, it's a fungus that's found in the water, and we don't quite know why. This disease has just exploded. It's likely because of climate change.
It's decimated populations.
The popularly accepted statistic is that 41% of frogs are at risk of becoming extinct.
Yeah, I think it's higher, but yeah. Poor froggies.
Frogs are so important, and they tell us a lot about what's going on around us. And that was kind of taken advantage of in this rhetoric around Alex Jones. But we'll talk more about that at the end. We're going to first talk about how great this frog is. So we're going to look at some pictures.
Ooh. All right, so you want me to try and describe this frog?
Yes.
Okay.
What are your thoughts?
10 out of 10, very good frog.
Amazing.
Most of the pictures I see, I don't immediately think green. Like, I've seen tree frogs before, and they're like all this nice bright green. But these guys are more like mud colored, probably very good for camouflage. So mostly like brown. Some of them have green around their faces, which I do wonder if that is like maybe a specific time of year or specific to like males or something. It looks like when it is a little bit green, it's like on the face, like around the lips and chin. Sometimes it goes over the head a little bit, but again, it's mostly this like dark mottled brown. It's got some black like dots and almost like stripes on the legs. Those like ear circles, I don't remember the term for them, are a little bit lighter in color. So frogs don't have ears like we do, of course. That'd be kind of weird. I don't want a frog with ears like us, but they have these circular sections behind their eyes and slightly below.
They're called tympanums. Just FYI.
Tympanums. So they're still brown, but slightly lighter colored. Like a lot of aquatic creatures, it's darker on the top and a little lighter on the bottom. It looks like their coloration varies. Some of them are much lighter. Some of them are much darker. Again, really blending in well with the mud around them. Back legs bigger than front, which is a typical frog thing to help them with that jumping ability. They've got the lovely like peeky out eyes that kind of stick out of their head. Mostly black. Again, some modeling in the color there. I'd say when it is green, it's a nice grassy green. Yeah, I don't know what else to say. It's very frog looking. I guess I've grown up looking at these frogs. So this is what I think of when I see frog. Looks like size fits in your palm. But yeah, can definitely sit on a good leaf.
What they were born to do.
I think that's where I'm going to conclude this because I don't have frog terminology. I mean, your basic frogs got webbed toes, feetsies, slanted backs.
Beautiful.
10 out of 10 frog.
The froggiest.
Froggiest of frogs. Kermit would be proud.
Amazing. He would.
Kermit does not really look that much like a frog.
Kermit.
But it's okay.
Yeah. This is the green frog, and it's not even that green compared to him, so.
No, it's not. It's kind of misleading name-wise. Like, I've seen some really bright green frogs, so when you initially said it, I wasn't picturing these guys because I think of them as brown.
Yeah, I don't think color names and common names are often, like, observable. I don't know why that is, but...
Yeah, but I guess depending on where you are, like, I don't think there's a ton of really green frogs in Pennsylvania, so if you see that green head, you're going to be like, oh yeah, that's a green one, where most are brown.
True. Yeah. Great job. You painted a great picture. Our official description is going to be a Frankenstein of what I wrote and the description on Animal Diversity Web. Here it is. Green frogs are divided into two subspecies, which can be distinguished by their overall coloration. There are northern green frogs. The scientific name for this subspecies is Lithobates clamitans melanota, and this occurs in the northern part of their range. And bronze frogs, Lithobates clamitans, occur in the southern portion of their range. Northern green frogs tend to have darker abdomens that are dark green, brown, or sometimes black. Northern green frogs have large dorsolateral folds that go from their eyes halfway down their body.
So that's the sides.
Yes.
Side and back.
I don't know if I saw folds. Their heads are lighter green than their bodies, and they have yellow throats and light tummies. They have dark bands on their sides and dark stripes on their legs.
I did it. I said that part.
You got that exactly right. Bronze frogs have more bronze coloration, and they lack the black spotting on some northern green frogs. Their throats are paler yellow. There have also been reports of frogs with albino orange or blue coloration, and those frogs can be either bronze or green frogs. Adult frogs of this species have a snout to vent length of 56 to 105 millimeters.
That's nose to butt.
Yeah, 56 millimeters. What is that? Is that half a centimeter? They're bigger than that.
How many millimeters do you say again?
56.
Yeah, that's 56. Yeah, that seems small.
Don't listen to my sizes. They're probably wrong. I'll fix this later. Adult frogs have a snout to vent length of 56 to 105 millimeters, though within that range, bronze frogs tend to be smaller and thinner than northern green frogs. Adults tend to be the same size, though they exhibit sexual dimorphism in features including their tympanums, thumbs, and forearms. Males have tympanums that are larger than their eyes, whereas females are the same size.
Ear circles?
Yep, males also have larger thumbs and forearms than females, and this is for mating. We'll talk about that later. Tadpoles are dark green with tails that are dark green or brown with dark spots. Their throat and the ventral side of their bodies are white.
Bottom.
Yeah, ventral is bottom.
I'm just helping clarify the jargon.
No, you're doing great. Thank you so much. And that concludes our description. So now that you have an idea of what they look like, they're kind of small. I wouldn't say small. They're not tiny. But like when I picture a big frog or like amphibian, I picture like the toad that Neville was holding in Harry Potter. J.K. Rowling is a transphobe, but the toad was the star of that movie.
They're not like that.
Right. They're not like that. They're not that big. They're like smaller than that, but they're not like teeny tiny. They're just like, small frog. You have an idea of what they look like now. So now let's talk about the habitat that they live in. Green frogs inhabit bodies of fresh water such as lakes, ponds, streams, springs, wetlands, or ephemeral ponds. And do you want to explain ephemeral ponds, Ilana?
Yeah, I love ephemeral ponds. So ephemeral means basically temporary. It's not there year round. So ephemeral ponds oftentimes are only present, some of them vary. Some of them can be present for a couple of years and then leave. Some of them are only present for like a week or two after a good rainstorm. So it's interesting to hear that they like ephemeral ponds because a lot of frogs don't, because they don't always last long enough for the tadpoles to survive to adulthood. But there are some that are longer, like a year or so, and that would be plenty.
Right. It's a trade-off because sometimes the pond doesn't last long enough, but if it does last long enough, it's like you hit the jackpot because there's no predators in there,
Yeah, the fish aren't there to eat your babies.
Yeah, because it doesn't last all year. So thanks for that explanation, Ilana. That's where they tend to live. Within these bodies of fresh water, they tend to inhabit the water that is surrounded by thick vegetation like reeds, grasses, sedges, shrubs, and trees. They spend most of their time along the shoreline hunting for land prey while still being able to quickly escape into deeper water to avoid predators. So that's why they kind of like the edge, is because that's where the good prey is, but it's also where the good escape is.
And if you've seen them, that's probably where you tend to see them, because whenever you walk past them, they're just in the water so fast.
With their little heads just sticking out, just waiting.
Yeah.
And I feel like that's just the common theme with amphibians, like all the time, is that they're on the edge of these two very drastically different environments. Like their whole thing is amphibians is that they can survive in land and water. And that just is so unique, and it's such a determining factor in their biology. So that's where they spend their time. Green frogs within the body of water tend to like deeper water, but they avoid areas populated by American bullfrogs. So if the American bullfrog is there, they'll inhabit the shallower water, even though that's not their ideal, just to have their own space. Onto their behavior. Green frogs are more active during the day, though they also hunt at night. Males are aggressively territorial, which I don't know if you expected that of a frog, but like...
I do. A lot of their croaking is just showing off to each other.
So true. But like aggressive is just like, I just didn't think they would be capable of that word, but like they are. So encounters between aggressively territorial male frogs start with intimidation, where a male will display its bright yellow throat to kind of scare the other one away. If the intruder persists despite this warning, the two will grapple with each other for a length of a few minutes to up to an hour. And it only ends when one surrenders or leaves.
Which is probably surrendering.
Sorry, surrenders and leaves. They gotta, like, if they surrender, they gotta get out of there. They lost the territory. But an hour? Like,
They got stamina.
could you do that grappling for your life? They're so strong. Other territory defense behaviors include kicking, biting, headbutting, and making aggressive calls that resemble growls. Occasionally, small communes of males will work together to collectively hold a territory much larger than an individual normally would. This all delights me. Large males may attempt to hold anywhere from 1 to 5 territories at once and will stay a few weeks in each one, but will stay in their home territory for mating season. More stationary males tend to be more aggressive during mating season.
Makes sense. They're spending all their energy on that one area. They don't want to give it up.
Yeah, right. But I just thought, like, it was funny that frogs have vacation homes.
Why not?
Green frogs enter brumation during cold winter. Brumation is hibernation, but for ectothermic animals. And ectothermic means that they don't produce their own body heat. Endothermic animals produce their own body heat and they hibernate. But since frogs don't, they brumate. Tadpoles brumate and wait to undergo metamorphosis. Though in warmer southern parts of their range, tadpoles are active year-round. And since frogs live multiple years, they'll go through brumation basically every stage of their life cycle. So that's when they'll brumate as tadpoles. Juveniles and adults brumate in water or on land under a light cover of soil or organic matter. It's a little blanket. Aquatic brumation is more common, but green frogs require aquatic sites that don't freeze completely and that have sufficient oxygen levels for the frogs to breathe the entire time they're brumating. So if that's not like available to them, they'll just do it on land.
Gotcha. Well, you gotta breathe. It's kind of important.
Yeah, very important. And then onto their life cycle. 3 to 6 days after egg fertilization, green frog eggs hatch into tadpoles. They grow as tadpoles for around 3 months until metamorphosis occurs, when they gradually lose their tails and develop front and back legs. And once they have legs, they are considered juveniles. Newly metamorphosed juveniles will grow most in their first year, when they often double in size from 30 millimeters to 60 millimeters, at which point they are considered sexually mature adults. Green frogs exhibit indeterminate growth, but their rate of growth slows to just 2 millimeters a year after becoming sexually mature. So indeterminate growth means that they can just keep growing however long they end up living. Like humans, like we tend to reach like a maximum and then we shrink from there, you know, like the cartilage compresses.
So if they could live to like 1,000 years old, we could have like a massive frog.
A huge frog. I bet there's one out there. That's all I'm saying.
I mean, probably not that big. There's gonna be a point where like the body just can't handle it anymore.
No, you have a good point there. I wish I could suspend my belief, but you're right.
I bet ancient frogs though were giant because of the higher oxygen levels to support that.
Right, way back when, big ass frogs.
I mean, there were big insects then too, so they had plenty to eat.
Some individuals currently can reach up to 100 plus millimeters. I just have to be doing my conversion wrong. Are 100 millimeters 10 centimeters?
Yes.
Yeah, I think my conversion was wrong before. I think these numbers are right. But some individuals can reach 100 plus millimeters. So that's more than 10 centimeters. And if you need more of an idea of how big that is, there are 30 centimeters in a foot. So a third of a foot, which is 4 inches. You're welcome.
That sounds about right.
Mating occurs in shallow areas of bodies of water. Mating pairs engage in amplexus, which is where the males will mount the females and hold on from behind with their large thumb and forearms, which we mentioned earlier. At some point, the female lays her eggs and then they're externally fertilized by the male. As they're doing this, the males will kick their back legs in the water to push the eggs away. The total time that this can take can range from 10 to 25 minutes, depending on how many eggs the female produces. And then when they're done, the pair will sound off a warning call to let all the other frogs know that they are temporarily unavailable to mate.
I've not watched frogs mating. I've watched toads, which is kind of like similar, and it's wild sometimes.
It's crazy. I once saw, I was hiking and it was around May. So it was like the start of amphibian breeding season. We were walking by this pond and there were just so many frogs going at it. Like, I can't even tell you. So many.
Oh yeah, they gather in mass to do this.
And there were frogs, there were toads, they didn't care. There were pairs of both species. They're just doing it. When they're mating, frogs and toads will grab onto anything that's vaguely frog or toad shaped. So there are pictures of male frogs doing amplexus with water bottles, with snakes, with rocks, with anything you could imagine that can be vaguely frog shaped.
Yeah, like males will jump on males too.
They'll also do amplexus with other species. It can be a male toad on a female frog and vice versa.
They're just so focused on mating that like they have special warning calls to let each other know like, hey, you're on the wrong one here. I know some toads, like males will shout to the other one if they get mounted by a male because they're like, yeah, no, get off of me, bro.
And maybe that frog's like, hey, this is just what I'm into. The gay frog.
I don't know. You tell me.
Well, I'll tell you a little more. During mating season, male green frogs will call more frequently, and frogs that failed to mate earlier in the season, between June and September, will call more frequently into the fall to try to get a successful mating attempt before the season ends. Females pick mates according to their body size and territory. Larger males make lower frequency calls, which provides an indication of male body condition before the female even sees the male. If it's a lower call, she knows it's a bigger body and he probably has more food available to him and has a better territory, you know? Better male territories have denser foliage, and these territories are often occupied by larger males. However, mating is not guaranteed regardless of body size or territory quality, and males and females may mate multiple times over the course of a season. So they're not monogamous. They all will mate with multiple individuals over the course of the season. As to lifespan, they live 5 to 6 years in the wild, but can live up to 10 years in captivity. And that's kind of how they live and what they're doing out there. So we're going to take a break to shuffle our notes, and we'll be back to talk about how these little gay frogs are queer as hell. Hi everyone, thank you so much for making it to the middle of another episode. I had a lot of fun researching and writing this one, and I honestly learned a lot about myself and how I relate to this conversation in the process. It was a great time. I used this time in the middle of the episode to promote our work in place of ads because Ilana and I do this independently without sponsors. That said, we work really hard to research, write, record, produce, and publicize this podcast. And if you like what you hear, you can help support us on our Patreon or Ko-fi, and the links to those are both in the description of this episode. One of the benefits of being a top-tier member of our Patreon is a shout-out every episode, but I want to take a moment right now to thank all of our current contributors on our Patreon. Thank you so much, as always, to Nate, and then thank you as well to Beans, Sam, Claire, and Kelsey. You all help us so much and support our work, and we really appreciate you. If you would like to join them and also get a shout out, again, you can contribute on the Patreon or Ko-fi, both links in the description. Another way to support us is to shout us out on social media. We are at Queerly Natural on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. I will always call it Twitter. You will not catch me calling it anything else. The links to our socials are also in the description of this episode. Thank you all so much for listening. I hope you really enjoy what else we have to say about the green frog. And back to the episode. And welcome back. We're back to talk about how Lithobates clamitans, the green frog, is queer. We're going to readdress just exactly what happened in the conspiracy. So I mentioned Alex Jones, but he wasn't the only one to be pushing this conspiracy theory that chemicals are turning the friggin' frogs gay. This was promoted by many voices in conservative media throughout the early 2010s. Media personalities began to claim that exposure to endocrine disrupting chemicals in the water supply was fundamentally changing sexuality and sex organs, causing a growing number of humans to become queer. And nobody was really arguing about this, and there wasn't really much research supporting or refuting it. And this all came to a head when in 2015, Alex Jones went on his rant, and that went mega viral. And the chemical that Alex Jones and many of these personalities were talking about was atrazine. And atrazine is the second most widely used herbicide in the United States and the single most widely used herbicide in the world. So the only herbicide that's used more in the US is glyphosate, and that's banned in a lot of other places. So atrazine is like the one that's used. And Alex Jones was saying they're putting it in the water and it's turning the freaking frogs gay. And, you know, there is a good chance it's in the water because we spray it on basically a good portion of our food, which is outside. And then, you know, it rains and it can wash off and into the water supply. So it's not a far leap.
And there is a lot of research on a variety of pesticides getting into the waters and disrupting ecosystems. That is kind of like a known issue for a lot of pesticides.
Right. Yeah. It's something that's of concern in that the mainstream scientific community has been on the lookout for since the mid 1990s, but these conspiracy theorists have taken it into like a completely different direction. And to kind of like paint the picture, Alex Jones claimed that atrazine was responsible for a, quote, majority of frogs in the US being homosexual.
I don't know where he got those numbers from.
Right? Like, that's just such a funny thing to say. Like, and maybe it's true, but like frogs keep being out there. So like, does it really matter? I don't know. That's completely unsupported by evidence. He also went on to say that the U.S. government was, quote, waging chemical warfare to promote homosexuality and decrease birth rates. And as I said at the start of this episode, why would the U.S. government want to create more gay people when it made being gay illegal for a lot of this country's history? Just like to put that question out there for Mr. Jones. But anyway, you might be thinking, why are we talking about this in 2023 when this is a thing that came up in 2015? Well, it's because this idea still pervades mainstream discourse. In June of 2023, so earlier this year, Robert F. Kennedy Jr., who is a prominent lawyer and political figure, claimed that more human children are experiencing gender dysphoria because of atrazine contamination in the water. So he's kind of saying what Alex Jones was encouraging us all to think, is that this is happening to the frogs, but it's going to also happen to us. And that's what Robert F. Kennedy Jr. said this year. So it's still a very relevant line of thought. So we'll address the question, are we actually turning the friggin' frogs gay?
Also, genderqueer kids have always been around, and they deserve love. And it's not a conspiracy. They just need to be respected.
Right. Exactly. Genderqueer humans, and as we will see, genderqueer frogs have always existed. So we're going to talk a little bit about sex determination in frogs and exactly how that works. So fish and non-avian reptiles show throughout taxonomic history repeated transitions between genetic, environmental, and a combination of the two sex determination methods. And there are no consistent patterns between groups. So as you know, birds are reptiles, but birds and mammals, their sex is genetically determined.
Birds don't even have the same sex chromosomes as us. It's very neat.
They don't. They're completely different. It's a completely different genetic system, but they're both determined by genetics. However, amphibian sex determination has been a little bit harder to pin down, and scientific opinion about how it worked has changed drastically over the 20th century. So originally, About 100 years ago, scientists widely thought that amphibian sex determination was the result of a combination of genetic and environmental factors. And then around 1950, biologists concluded from sex chromosome karyotypes that environment was the dominant determiner. And then later in the 1900s, I hate calling it the 1900s, 20th century, I just forgot the other word for it. But later in the 20th century, a body of evidence has emerged from wild populations, leading scientists to conclude that amphibians have strictly genetically determined sex. So they've gone from mostly environmental to mostly genetic to a combination of the two. Like, which is it? The most recent conclusion is that it's genetically determined. However, if it was genetically determined, you would expect there to be consistent ratios across populations, right? It would be more like human populations where it would be closer to 50-50, and it would be the same across environments because it's not environmentally determined or influenced. However, even though the studies were coming out indicating that it was genetically determined, they were still finding that across environments, frog sex ratios were different between natural and human-made environments. So between urban, suburban, and agricultural environments. And the difference was that in human-influenced environments, there was a higher ratio of female frogs. So that kind of plays into the Alex Jones thing, where he was like, we're turning the friggin' frogs gay. He wasn't actually talking about gay frogs. He was talking about what we would call intersex frogs. He was talking about male frogs who were exposed to these chemicals and were feminized, or in his words, demasculinized. He was talking about frogs that were male who somewhere along their development developed testicular oocytes. And oocytes are cells that produce eggs. So they had these egg-producing cells in their testes. And this body of evidence showing that there was a higher ratio of female frogs in human-made environments seemed to support that.
These male frogs that have the testicular oocytes, so egg-producing cells, are they able to actually produce viable eggs?
In some cases, yes. In some cases, they put these intersex male frogs with testicular oocytes in the same treatment as male frogs that produced sperm, and they could produce viable eggs.
Are they also able to produce sperm, or is it only eggs now?
I didn't quite find that. It said that they had testicular oocytes. It didn't say anything about testicular spermatocytes. But that's a really good question.
Then when they're counting the frogs and they're counting the females, do they count these guys as females?
If it's a good study, they count them as their own thing. I believe that from the outside, these frogs would appear male.
Okay, because you said there's a higher rate of females.
Right. There are males with egg-producing cells, but there are also frogs that have the ability to develop according to their genotypic sex. So, for example, I didn't look up what frog sex chromosomes are, but for this example, I'm just going to hypothetically use X and Y. It might not be X and Y. But for example, there may be frogs that are XY start to develop testes, and then somewhere along the line, they can reverse that development, which is amazing. They can stop it, destroy the gonads that they started making, the testes, and they can go back and fully develop female organs. And this reversal and redevelopment can happen depending on various conditions that the young frog is exposed to. But those frogs, where the reversal happened, would not appear intersex at all. These frogs that I just talked about would appear female.
Gotcha. Interesting. So this happens after the tadpole stage, when they're already getting to the juvenile stage?
No, it may happen even before that, like in the egg and young tadpole stage.
Oh, okay. So it can happen really early. Gotcha. Does it happen later?
I didn't find anything about it happening to fully adult frogs. It seemed to happen like pretty early on in development.
Okay.
But late enough in development that they'd already started to produce these testes, you know?
Gotcha.
But they can reverse that, destroy the testes, and produce the other gonad. And that can happen to female frogs too. This reversal can happen to either sex. So XX frogs, or female frogs, like I said, it might not actually be that sex chromosome, but XX frogs can start to develop frog ovaries, be exposed to whatever condition causes the reversal, destroy those ovaries, and then produce fully functional testes and appear to be 100% from the outside male frogs. These frogs that undergo reversal, I will repeat, do not appear intersex. They just appear as the typical sex that is opposite from their chromosomes.
Cool.
This gender nonconformity is not specific to green frogs. It's just that most of the research into it is on green frogs, which is why I chose green frogs for the episode. But research has found that this happens everywhere. Research has found that there are intersex and sex-reversed frogs in all types of environments.
Sometimes you just gotta change your mind.
Right. Like, in that sort of plasticity, like I said, it plays into this common theme of the frog being able to cross boundaries. It's just fascinating to me that this theme is so common in so many aspects of the frog's life. And it must be so useful being able to change that part of yourself depending on the need. But this is just an ability that frogs have. They do it everywhere. However, this incorrect idea that it's caused by chemicals, that intersex frogs are caused by the presence of chemical pollutants, was almost furthered by research after the original incorrect claim was made in 2002. And this is because very little research was actually genotyping these frogs and figuring out which sex chromosomes they had. A lot of the research that was occurring in the early 2000s through 2010-ish, these researchers were going out, finding populations of frogs, counting how many were male and female, and then they were observing that there were more females in human-made environments and assuming that that was because during development, males were undergoing sex reversal to become females. But how would they know that if they didn't look at the sex chromosomes?
Yeah, I will say at that time period, it would be very expensive to run those like genetic tests.
Right, it would have been very expensive, but just because you can't do those tests, like, I don't think they should have been making the claims they were making, knowing they weren't collecting the data they needed to back up those claims, you know?
I will say in papers, people do speculate, but it should be clearly stated this is a speculation and not a conclusion. Like, this needs further testing. Like, sometimes papers will say, you know, here's like 4 hypotheses for why we saw these results. We don't know which one it is. That's further testing. And sometimes people go and be like, this one hypothesis that I like shall be the answer. I don't know if that's how those papers were phrasing it or not, but yeah.
Right. So the original paper in 2002 that I mentioned before was published by a researcher at the University of Berkeley. And I don't want to say his name or promote his TED Talk because clearly it was very effective in spreading this misinformation. But this researcher went and did a very convincing TED Talk on his research when the research was not peer-reviewed. So it was not examined by other scientists in the field to say, yes, this was good research. It was not peer-reviewed, and the author did not provide his data set. He did not make that public or viewable.
Oh, I don't like that. I don't like that at all.
No. Right. So it was not even a valid study, but like I said, his TED Talk was so popular, and the idea was so... It played off of this fear that people already have in their minds. It just spread like wildfire, and that idea went on to, I don't want to say contaminate, but while we're talking about pollution, why not? To contaminate future valid research studies because they based their theory on this invalid study. So for example, there was another study done in 2014 that I believe was peer-reviewed. It was published in a very legit journal, but The paper was basically just saying, there's a lot of intersex frogs in suburban environments. Okay, it didn't really compare to anything else. So,
So you can't make any conclusion from that, really, except they exist.
exactly. Yes, there are a lot of frogs in suburban environments, but you're not saying there's not a lot of intersex frogs in forest environments. But, that paper, any just member of the public would read that paper and say, oh, wow, suburban environmental degradation is causing more frogs to be intersex. That's how the lack of research literacy in the public, which I'm not blaming the public for not having that. That's not a skill that's readily available to everybody. But the lack of scientific literacy is taken advantage of to peddle ideas that are unsupported by evidence.
And sometimes this is more taken advantage of, and other times it's just a genuine mistake or misunderstanding.
Right. Researchers also have their own unexamined biases, and that's why there's a scientific community of people always constructively criticizing the work that they're consuming, just like us. So that's kind of where the research was. And then I finally found a paper published in 2019 where they did genetically test these frogs, figure out which sex chromosomes they had, and then they also looked at the phenotype. And this study found that, yes, there are a lot of intersex frogs, but there are a lot of intersex frogs in a lot of different environments. And the rate of those intersex frogs existing in the population does not correlate to the type of environment the population is in. Intersex frogs are found in forested, suburban, and agricultural environments, as are frogs that have undergone sex reversal. And in addition, this study also found that populations with a high rate of sex reversal didn't necessarily have a lot of intersex frogs. The rate of sex reversal in intersex individuals did not correlate at all, in addition to those traits not correlating to the environment. So, in conclusion, I just wanted to say that this misinterpretation that has become a meme, the misinterpretation that the chemicals in the water are turning the friggin' frogs gay, it stems from a long-standing queerphobic assumption that homoerotic behavior or unusual sexual morphology in nature is caused by pollution, when that's not the case. Just because homoerotic behavior and unusual sexual morphology exist in polluted environments does not mean that those traits were caused by pollution. In this line of thinking, queer, intersex, and trans bodies are pathologized because they're nothing more than strange products of a contaminated environment. And that's not the case. This frog's ability to reverse its sex, that ability existed long before we started contaminating the environment.
And it's in quite a few species. I mean, we've already covered, I think, a couple fish.
Right. It's not the abnormality. Being trans, intersex, or queer, that's not a strange product of the environment. That's a very natural and beautiful product of the environment. And it's been a product of the environment when that environment was uncontaminated by our wastes. And it continues to be a product of the environment as we contaminate it.
So what you're saying is we're queerly natural.
We're queerly natural. Such a beautiful way to put it. And I also wanted to say that Alex Jones was talking about they're turning the friggin' frogs gay. This, to me, implied that there was a straight frog who was exposed to a polluted environment who turned gay, when that's not the reality. Alex Jones was talking about sex reversal in intersex frogs, and that sex determination, the determination of what gonads and morphology a frog will have, that happens during frog development. So even if these contaminants in the environment were turning these frogs intersex and reversing their sex, that would happen before the frog existed, before the frog became an adult. And so these frogs are just being born and coming into being intersex and as sex reversed individuals. They don't know anything else. They have the full ability to go on and live happily content frog lives. And so research does not find that contamination in the environment is causing these traits. But even if it was, like even if down the road contaminants become concentrated enough that we do turn more frogs gay, intersex, or sex reversed, why is that a bad thing? They can still be very happy frogs, just like we can be very happy queer people. And speaking from the perspective of a queer person, trans and intersex people don't care if our bodies are the products of the genes we were born with, or surgeries, or medication, or even a contaminated environment. We are just seeking happy and content lives, just like these frogs, because we're all queerly natural.
Thank you, Sage, for teaching us about the lovely queer lives of the green frog. And everyone else, until next time, remember, love who you are, be who you will, you're queerly natural.
Thank you all, and we'll see you next time.
Bye!
Queerly Natural was created by Ilana Zeitzer, Sage Roden, and Elizabeth Furman, with music by Migfist20. Visual design for the show is done by Ilana Zeitzer. Editing and production is done by Sage Roden and Matthew Walsh. To get updates about the podcast, follow us at Queerly Natural on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. We also upload all of our sources and episode transcripts to our website, queerlynatural.com. If you liked what you heard today and would like to support the show, contributions can be made on Patreon or Ko-fi, or you can spread the word and tell your friends. Thank you so much for listening, and join us every first Wednesday of the month for a new episode. Until next time, stay queer and remember clearly, it's natural.